Please join me in welcoming Mike Long.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. First, Katie, thank you very much for the warm introduction. For everybody else, I'm very humbled and grateful to be here and share this information with you. So today, I'm going to be sharing with you an update on one of the many projects the ATT&CK team is actively working on and supporting. And this involves mapping various information security control frameworks to attack techniques and behaviors. So as we go forward with this talk, we'll start by providing an overview of this project. We'll talk about some of the specific challenges that we're trying to address. We'll share some of the prototypes we've created along the way. And finally, we'll close by showing you some of our future goals and plans, basically showing how we want this project to go going forward. By the way, as I look at the clock, it's not lost on me that I'm the last thing standing between you and a great lunch, so I'll be sure to keep this moving. So fundamentally, what kicked this off is the fact that many of the organizations we support are required either by policy, law, best practice. They're required to select and implement information security controls documented in various publications. We have NIST SP 853, commonly in use by the government, PCI DSS, commonly used by private sector, and of course our CIS controls. So we've got all these different controls. They provide varying levels of guidance. One of the commonalities across them is basically the mindset that when we're picking controls and we're deciding how to configure and implement them, those decisions should really be driven by knowledge of the threats that are actively targeting our organizations and the vulnerabilities found within. So as we go forward, we'll talk about some examples where ATT&CK can help. But despite this, we find that many organizations still experience similar challenges. When you look at all these different frameworks, some of them are just vast in scope. If you look at NIST 853, when you expand all of the controls, the implementations, the enhancements, you're left with thousands of controls. And so it's very easy for people in that situation to ask, which control should I select and why? On the worst end of the spectrum, we've actually seen organizations that just elect for the brute force approach and they select all of them. So on the one hand, they're fortified, but at what cost? We have other organizations that have been dealing with these controls long before ATT&CK existed. And in many cases, they're wondering, how do we better integrate ATT&CK into our existing control processes and technologies? So these are some problems that we've been focusing on for a little while. And we've actually talked to a lot of organizations that are kind of taking the initiative, and they're currently making their own ATT&CK control mappings. And a little bit later, we'll show you some of the cool use cases you can derive from these mappings. But really the question for us as the ATT&CK team is, how can we help centralize and curate these mappings so that we can make them available to the global cybersecurity community? So that's really the premise behind this project. And as we go forward, we'll show you some of the different prototype mappings we made along the way. We'll talk about some of the challenges we've encountered and how we hope to address those challenges going forward. So we'll start by showing an example mapping. We've talked about these mappings, but if you're anything like me, you're asking, what do they look like? How do we use them? Why might they be helpful? So this is an excerpt taken from a prototype mapping we made that shows how we can map NSA's top 10 mitigation strategies to attack tactics. Now you'll notice that the mapping values were derived from the NIST cybersecurity framework. So you have the common functions of identify, protect, detect, and so on. So by having these mappings, we can start making some useful analysis. For example, you might start by saying, which of these controls can help mitigate threats that I care about? So we'll start with initial access as an example because, well, that's when the intrusions begin. So we see many organizations often have an abundance of protective controls, but they might be asking, what is our effectiveness with respect to detective controls? And so if we take a mapping like this, we could walk down the detective column and we could start asking some thought-provoking questions. For example, are we continuously hunting for network intrusions? Are we segregating our networks using application-aware defenses? Have we integrated threat reputation services? And as you go through this workflow, you'll likely identify capability gaps, which can help inform your future cybersecurity roadmaps. Likewise, it'll start giving you an understanding of your current coverage as it exists today. And that could be useful for building follow-up assessments, for example, measuring the effectiveness of your existing controls. So in the grand scheme of things, really these mappings are just another tool that we can leverage in order to improve our understanding of our cybersecurity effectiveness. Now I'll share with you another prototype mapping. This was actually developed in response to a strong community request that we develop a mapping showing how ATT&CK maps to the controls in NIST 800-53. Now this is a complicated problem to tackle, and we've made a lot of different prototypes. And through this process, we've identified a number of challenges that we're eventually going to need to overcome. So I'll start by sharing one of the prototypes that we created, and we'll kind of talk about how does it work and what kind of limitations are present. So like most cybersecurity products, we started with a spreadsheet. So on the left-hand side, we have our attack tactics organized we have our attack techniques organized by tactic. On the top side, along the x-axis, we have our NIST 853 controls organized by control family. Now, one of the immediate challenges is that the spreadsheet is extremely large. We basically have about 244 cells extending to the right, making this a little bit unwieldy at times. Furthermore, scrolling down, we've got 266 attack techniques as it exists today. So one of the challenges that we need to work through is, how do we deal with the fact that these frameworks are going to continue to grow and expand? Now, one of our other approaches was taking this mapping and just dividing it by control family. So on the one hand, it's a little bit smaller, it's a little bit easier to cope with, but the fact remains is, at this point, it's an Excel spreadsheet, it's a little bit error prone, and we need to find some better ways to cope with this scale. And so that kind of brings us to the challenges we derived by creating these different prototypes. And I share these with you for a couple of reasons. One, if you've made these mappings, I suspect you've probably experienced similar challenges. And two, we're using this as the basis for the solutions that we plan on developing in the future. One of the first challenges is mapping criteria. So how we kind of mapped to the different functions of the NIST cybersecurity framework, but those can be broad and at times subjective. So we want to have criteria that is very clear and that there are defined conventions so that if we're working in teams or sharing this with the community, it's easy to jump in and start making contributions following known standards. To the point of standards, we also recognize the fact that both attack and these different control frameworks will continue to grow and expand. And so it might not be enough to just grow these in an Excel spreadsheet. We might need a structured data solution that can keep up with the changing nature of these control frameworks. Then there's scale. The fact is, we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of controls. So we need to find a programmatic way to deal with that. Last thing I'll share with these challenges is we've seen many organizations have made these mappings, and we know right away that they're probably of great value to the community. But the challenge is sharing it. In many cases, when you're dealing with your controls, you're talking about your security posture, and there might be sensitive data that you don't want to reveal to the public. So we fully acknowledge that challenge. And what we want to do going forward is find a way where organizations can share these mappings, we can make it available, and perhaps MITRE can serve as the curator to make that happen. So that brings us to our future goals. So we talked about some of the different challenges, we showed some of the prototypes. So now we're going to talk about what we're going to do to try and make this reality and get this into your hands in a timely manner. So fundamentally, our end state is we want to provide a curated source of trusted mappings that can support community contributions. We found that in many ways ATT&CK has been such a success because it's been driven by the people who use it, and we want to continue that model going forward. Beyond that, as far as the technical approach, as we go forward, we're going to start developing a flexible mapping data structure. And I looked at some of the other common structures we've seen kind of related to this. If we look at STIX, for example, they've shown how we could take a very large body of different criteria and put it in a structured format. And our thought process is if we have that, then it should be a little bit more scalable than, say, an Excel spreadsheet of doom. And lastly, when we have this structured mapping format, then it should be a little bit easier to make that data accessible in a user-friendly application. So right now our current motivation is the attack navigator. Maybe it could be a part of it or a separate entity if it's not possible to integrate, but the end state remains. We want to get these mappings to you, and we want it to be an easy process to use them. And so that brings us to our conclusion. The first thing I'll point out is obviously this project is in its early stages, and the good news with that is that this is the perfect time to offer your input, your ideas, your perspectives. I know, having spoken with the different controls participants during the Birds of a Feather session, that this is a subject that people have strong ideas about. And so if there are specific mappings you want, let us know. Let us know what mappings you want and why, and then that positions us in a better position to try and make that reality. Other thing I'll say is, if you're one of these organizations that has taken the initiative and you've made a really great mapping and you want to share it with the community, definitely reach out to us. We're happy to have that conversation and figure out how to get it out there. Last thing I'll say, and this kind of underscores a common theme at ATT&CKcon, is that when we work together, we gain advantages over our adversaries. So only by working together can we make this reality. And if this is a subject that you're really passionate about, we ask, let us know if you want to help, and we're happy to have a discussion about how to make that reality. So that was the controls mapping update. I'd like to open up the floor now and answer any questions you may have. Most common question is, what are they serving for lunch?
Yeah, we wanted to allow a few minutes. I know this is something that a lot of folks have looked into in the audience, who've spoke before. Any questions for Mike?
And I will say, if there aren't any questions now, I'm going to be lingering around, so do feel encouraged to reach out to me. I'll be on site. And likewise, if you have any further questions or requests from us, do feel free to reach out to us, the information below.
Mike, one question that I had, I was wondering, you mentioned in the challenges slide, but could you talk a little bit more about the challenge of like a one-to-many thing, or the challenge of the fact that it sort of depends how you implement a control? What were you finding as you were trying to map these controls to each technique? Like, how tough was that?
So that's one of the big challenges with these mappings. On the one hand, it's really easy to look at an Excel spreadsheet and say, if we have malicious code protection, that will block spear phishing attachments. But speaking as a red teamer, I know that that is not the case. It really depends on the specific implementation and a lot of variables. So the challenge is balancing that. We want to offer guidance that can help organizations, but at the same time, we have to respect the fact that the effectiveness of these controls really depends on your implementation. So at the end of the day, this is a starting point to understand your environment, recognizing that it does require deeper examination to really understand your effectiveness.
Okay, well said. Yeah, I don't have anything to say to that. Yeah, I appreciate you also bringing that red team perspective. Hey, I don't know if this is actually going to work. From a red team perspective, maybe not so much. So I think that's another theme, that we've talked about all conferences, this false sense of security, and that's seriously a risk here. Funny to use the word risk, but a risk of doing this controls mapping. But I think that kind of as we as a community look at this, keeping that in mind, I think it's really important, and hopefully we can strengthen this and move on together. So please join me in thanking Mike Long.